Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 21st, 2017. We finally made it to the winter solstice. I talked a lot about it yesterday, and it wasn't even the winter solstice yet. Today it is 11:28 Eastern Standard Time. We'll be off the air, so you'll have plenty of time if you're listening live to, get outside, make a pagan costume. I don't know. Do anything you want. Build a Stonehenge. I think you should probably have started that one earlier, but that's what you get for procrastinating, I say. And, we're ready to run another show here yet again. This never stops, apparently. I'll have to sort of build some breaks into it, like we build fake commercial breaks into things. Maybe we'll take some time off at some point. Anyway, plenty to catch up with today. No real rage tweeting today. I think the president is actually kind of proud of himself of having overseen, I guess, the passage of the world's worst tax bill. Not yet owning up to, of course, the heist that he is pulling, but the rest of us know what's going on. And as Greg will tell you, and has been telling you for a long time, the tax bill is extraordinarily unpopular. Barely even a tax bill at that, really, to be honest. And, we'll catch up on the latest on all of those things. He's claiming credit at the moment for people's Christmas bonuses, companies that are giving out Christmas bonuses to their workers, and I'm assuming that he's going to insist that they be called Christmas bonuses because they can't possibly be Hanukkah bonuses. Hanukkah's over. So maybe that's his logic. I don't know. It could be Kwanzaa bonuses. Hardly anyone ever calls them that anyway. And of course, a lot of people will find that their bonuses, like regular people who work for a living and earn wages, will find that those bonuses are taxed fairly heavily. Whereas we learned there are many ways to avoid taxation on almost everything if you are rich enough. Oh, here comes Greg. The melodious chimes of Skype alerting us early. You must be. Is there some frost on the roads, or on your way to work early today?
Actually, I just thought I'd chime in and point out that he's proposed legislation that these are all called Trump bonuses.
Has he? I may actually have done that at some point.
If he hasn't, he will.
He probably will.
He thinks of it.
Yes, as you know, because companies are giving bonuses at the end of the year, it's because of the tax bill, not because of Christmas or the end of the year or anything else. He's bigger than Jesus now, and it's time to get things straight. They're Trump bonuses. It's Trumpmas, really, if you get right down to it. The three wise men were almost assuredly on their way to Mar-a-Lago and got lost, I think.
It's been fascinating in a sort of weird way to look at the reaction both from the Republican Party and on Twitter to a lot of this. I'm just looking at one of my favorite cartoons. It's entitled Medieval Conservatism, and it's a bunch of peasants digging in the mud. One says to the other, the Lords worked hard to get where they are. Another one says they shouldn't really have to pay taxes to the king. And the third one says, if they had more gold, then we would too. It's only common sense. And, basically a lot of the conversation on Twitter has been interesting. We talked about the David Frum column yesterday, which was talking about conservatism in general, and Jennifer Rubin and Charles C.W. Cook fighting in particular. But it extends beyond that. You see very unhappy conservatives not understanding why everybody isn't happy the way they are. They're thrilled because they got this tax bill. This is what they always wanted. And so the whole debate among conservatives is, just because you hate Trump, does that mean that you should hate this tax bill because basically we wrote it and Trump just signed it? So shouldn't you just embrace it and say this is wonderful?
That's one reaction.
And others, very thoughtful people. You read on the air the Tom Nichols short tweet storm about how, the issue is that every time you do something, you really want it done by somebody competent, so you don't just poison the well for ever doing this again. So there's that reaction. And then the conservatives look at a broader picture and say, but what's wrong with the public? Why isn't everybody excited about the fact that we're all getting $1,000, I mean, what's wrong with you people?
Yeah, well,
You should all just be celebrating, and my reaction was more along the lines of, the boss says you have to move out of your house and burn your house down. You move into this smaller place over here, and your kids have nothing. By the way, here's $1,000.
yes,
And
maybe.
so we're looking at this and shrugging our shoulders and saying, why is this good? And the conservatives are saying, look at you liberals. Everybody's getting $1,000 and you're making fun of it and you hate it. What's wrong with you people? But what that is a broader frustration on the part of conservatives that the general public doesn't want what they want. And this has been a problem for them all along. Their policies are really unpopular. It's not what the public wants, and it's not what the Trump base wants.
Well, they had to get rid of the Hastert rule and get rid of things that are supported by 60% of. Well, it used to be they thought that 60% of the Republican conference meant it was more or less supported by 60% of the Republican base. But Hastert turned out to be a child molester, so they got rid of the rule, and now it doesn't have to be supported by anybody except the people who are writing it if they're going to make a lot of money. And so they figured we might as well just go for it and steal what we can.
Steal what we can, and so now the average generic ballot number between Democrats and Republicans for the House in November 2018, the average is up to over 13. We've just never seen anything like this before. And part of it is unhappiness about this stupid tax bill that people don't like. And so Mitch McConnell and others who keep getting asked about it are getting very testy about it. McConnell was asked about by a reporter yesterday about it and said something along the lines of, well, I know you reporters are there to just ask Democratic talking points. Excuse me, Democrat talking points.
Oh, yes, right. Thank you.
And
Save
so,
us all.
they're getting annoyed that people just aren't saying, oh, this is wonderful. It's not. And they understand that now they have to go out and sell this piece of crap. But the problem is that the headlines this morning aren't great tax bill passes, everybody gets money, everybody's thrilled. It's here's the list of Republicans who are going to benefit in Congress by passing this tax bill that's going to benefit themselves. And that's the kind of thing that people hear and they don't forget.
Well, it's easy, and although it doesn't necessarily fit on a bumper sticker, everyone can grasp, oh, they wrote a tax bill to give themselves a tax cut and either left us out entirely or raised our taxes to pay for it.
Now, the tax cut that happened under Obama, people are also writing, interestingly, just the observations that when that happened, people didn't credit Obama if they didn't like him.
Yes.
And a lot of people who saw it didn't really see it. I mean, if you get a small raise in your paycheck and you feel that that's relatively inadequate to cover your costs,
yes,
you're not going to be thrilled about it. And again, the conservatives are all, well, what do you stupid liberal elite coastal people, an extra $25 to $30 is a big deal. I could take my family out to dinner, with all these ridiculous arguments, missing the bigger point. If people don't feel like it's a break, then they're not going to vote like it's a break for them.
Well, there's certainly, I mean, you can't make people feel it.
You can't make people feel the way you do just because you think that it's okay or is a good idea or something that you always wanted. That's not how the public reacts to that. And the public's already reacted to that, and they hate this bill.
Oh, well.
Oh, by the way, they also hate Trump.
Oh.
And so, is Trump going to get the credit for this? Trump's going to get credit for something they hate is what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I hope this thing works out properly. I always worry that, well, something really weird and inexplicable can yet happen. And, well, I don't know. For some reason, they're interviewing Trump supporters in the backwaters, and they love it. I can't wait to pay more taxes, they say. It's terrific because he's doing so much with my opium problem. I don't know.
Well, U.S. life expectancy has fallen for the second straight year due to the opioid crisis, and Kellyanne Conway hasn't fixed it yet.
No.
I mean, there's just incredible unhappiness with what this government isn't doing.
Has Kellyanne Conway said word one about the opioid crisis since she was appointed? No, right? She doesn't even know what it is.
No, it's all BS.
Right. If you can find it while kneeling on a couch, she can take it.
Yeah, but you got an extra $35. Why aren't you happy? Shut up and vote for us.
Don't buy opioids.
I don't see it. I don't see it happening, and I just scratch my head at why people would think it would work out that way.
I do not know. Opioids?
It's a problem.
Another
problem is that 25% of the country are children, and they get 1 out of every 10 tax dollars. And there's 2 million kids who are unfunded with CHIP. There's some minor good news. I see in the Washington Examiner, the House spending bill is going to give a short-term children's health insurance funding.
Oh, okay.
Till January 19th. It includes nearly $3 billion to tide over states running out of funds from the children's health insurance program so they can figure out what to do. It's a continuing resolution, and that was released early this morning.
Okay, that's a thing.
So it's $750 million in new money for community health centers, a special diabetes program that also is short on funds. So that's funded from the $750 million, but it's all short term. It's not a long-term multi-layer reauthorization, but it does inject some new funds for states that are running short, so they don't have to kick people off the rolls for right now, if it passes, because we really don't know what's happening between now and Friday.
There's also, weirdly, free Papa John's pizza for Donald Trump and anyone in the White House for eternity. I don't know why they put that in there, but they did.
But it is. So there's also I just want to get it in before I forget. We talked yesterday about the power sharing arrangements and all the finesse-manship that's needed to make sure that we understand what's happening in the Virginia House of Delegates.
Yeah, forget all that.
The board will meet next Wednesday at 10 a.m. to draw names to determine the winner in the Virginia House of Delegates race in the 94th District. Yesterday, the Democrat had won by one single vote, but a 3-judge panel determined that that vote was actually for the Republican, and so it's now an actual tie. Yes. I saw the ballot. It probably was for the Republican, but you really can't tell, so I can't be too upset about that determination. I don't believe that they did it because they're all Republican judges. I don't. I think that Virginia recounts have actually been fairly reasonable. I looked at the ballot. They published the ballot.
Yeah.
Anybody could be confused about that thing because the guy circled both names and then crossed off the Democrat.
Well, he kind of half crossed off the Democrat because he crossed off Ed Gillespie's name too, but they counted it as a vote for him.
Yeah. So the whole thing was weird, but I get why it's confusing.
It is definitely confusing, and here's what I gleaned from it just for a second. Process-wise, this is a calamity.
Because they already said it.
They had already
okay,
decided
and you can't go back and say, oh, it's not okay because we lost.
Essentially, yes. One of the observers who was there for the Republicans sat through the process, watched them decide what to do with this ballot. What they decided to do with the ballot is to say it's an overvote and therefore it doesn't count. The person voted for 2 out of the 3, by the way, 2 out of the 3 candidates for delegate for that district, and everything else was fine. And they voted for all Republicans except they voted for both the Democrat and the Republican for the delegate race. Then I guess the best explanation is they then decided by putting 1 slash through the bubble for the name of the Democratic candidate, changed their mind or realized I filled in the wrong one and then filled in the Republican, however the chronology of it went. They looked at this thing and they said, this has 2 ovals filled in for the same office. It's an overvote. The whole ballot doesn't count. They set it aside and they said, so is everybody okay with that? Does everybody agree that's the outcome? They looked at the rules and they said, yeah, if you fill in more than 1 bubble for a single office, that's an overvote, and that's the rule. The ballot gets segregated and thrown out. Everybody cool with it? Yes, good. Then they went on and kept counting, and then they put the ballots in the right piles. Then they counted up, and they said, okay, the results are tick, 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 1 vote victory for the Democrat. At which point, one of the Republican observers says, well, actually the next day says, you know what? Now that I think about it, I was fooled into agreeing yesterday about this 1 ballot. And judges, could you reverse that and bring that ballot back in? Let us examine it and then decide that what this person really meant by the 1 slash through the Democrats' bubble meant they were changing their mind and not voting for the Democrat but voting for the Republican without ever addressing what does it mean that they drew 2 slashes, an X, through the bubble for Ed Gillespie. Nothing. Never mind. It's a vote for Ed Gillespie. Or anyway, it doesn't matter. Entire thing is now thrown up in the air, and they're gonna draw lots / flip a coin to figure out who gets the seat, and therefore whether or not there's 50-50 shared control in the House of Delegates, or 51-49 for Republicans. It was sealed yesterday. The process was over. The observers had agreed. When they figured out that meant a 1-vote victory for the Democrats, one guy decided, I was hoodwinked, and I want to reopen the case, which was closed yesterday. That's how we got here.
Yeah, it's like the House keeping the vote open for an extra 3.5 days till they round up that one vote.
Right.
There's a process, but we'll just break
yes,
it when we need to.
No. Yeah. Here we go. Well, we better win that lot drawing anyway.
Mm. But just so you know, so that
sucks.
Lot drawing, the drawing of the names,
yes,
will be next week.
Maybe, unless they lose,
Wednesday,
in which
10
case
a.m.
it'll happen again another
No,
time.
it'll happen, and then if the Democrat wins, then they'll challenge it and find some reason why they didn't do the name drawing right. You use your left hand, and the rules say it's supposed to be your right hand, and I'm not comfortable with it. Let's just do it again. Let's just keep doing it till we get the result we want.
That's one way of handling it.
But hey, you've always said when you have the gavel in your hand,
that's right.
It's incredibly powerful because you get to set the rules. Anyway, Catherine Rampell has a nice story here, tweet about a CNBC piece she didn't write, but she tweeted about dozens of lawmakers stand to reap tax windfall due to a GOP loophole. And that is the headline a lot of people are going to be seeing today. Meanwhile, Michael Bitzer, Bowtie Politics on Twitter, says, once again, it looks like we will enter an election cycle that will break what we traditionally know about midterms, and has this nice little graph here. You can see it on the list I sent you because it's gray and orange, so it pops up.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
The average lead in early generic polls for the party in power versus the party out of power over the last 18 years. And just by glancing at it, you can see that this plus 13.4 lead that the Democrats have in the generic ballot is just bigger than anything that we've ever had before. The closest that it comes to is 2008 and 2006, but it's pretty remarkable and way different than 2014 and 2010. So we'll see how this works out over time, but so far it doesn't really look like it's working out particularly well for the Republicans. And of course, I would remind you, there's a whole bunch of other stuff also going on at the same time. For example, story in Foreign Policy this morning, exclusive, White House counsel knew in January Flynn probably violated the law. Don McGahn was looking at whether the National Security Advisor violated federal laws just days after Trump moved into the White House. The records reflect the concerns that McGahn, the White House counsel, had that Michael Flynn, then the president's National Security Advisor, this is before he was fired, had possibly violated either one or both laws at the same time, lying to federal investigators, and with violations of the Logan Act, a centuries-old federal law that prohibits private citizens from negotiating with foreign governments. While that's happening, NBC News is reporting Russian trolls went on attack during key election moments. So recovered Twitters show that they were very strategic in terms of when they decided to coordinate Twitter bot Russian troll farm attacks. For example, suicide bombers killing 32 in Brussels, or Trump holds a town hall in New Hampshire, or Clinton surges past Trump by 12 points in polls. These are the things that would, or the day after Hillary Clinton accepts the Democratic nomination, these were things that would give them spikes in the troll farming efforts to poison the news.
Yeah, and you don't have to be that sophisticated a political operative to understand that those moments in American news give you an opportunity to screw around with things. That's not,
well,
of
that
course,
they
the big
tried
mystery.
is just like totally crystal clear. That's not even for debate.
Right.
The question is whether or not it was coordinated, and whether, for example, there were specific places that those were put. Facebook feeds that happened to be pro-Trump or pro-Breitbart or whatever. So that'll be part of what they're looking at. But Mark Warner had a remarkable speech yesterday on the floor of the Senate, basically implying that this isn't just smoke, this is fire with Russian collusion. And it was to the point where any moves to get rid of Robert Mueller, Bobby Three Sticks, would be a red line that you shouldn't cross. and grounds for action by Congress, whatever that means.
Yes, they would. I think milling about counts as an action. So
Well,
that's
sternly
probably
worded
true.
letter, you didn't, you have to include that on the things that one does.
Yes,
Or,
I mean,
or maybe even an op-ed in the New York Times.
Right.
There's a lot of really important stuff that people can do.
writing a letter to the file and locking it in a safe, also a popular Democratic move, as well as stern words. We love
Yeah,
those.
stern words can happen. Yep.
Yeah, they're usually in writing.
Or even just finding both sides. There's a whole lot of stuff
well, that's
that
true.
people can do and have done. Sorry about that.
One of the sides is calling now. Hello, what do you have to say? I'll take your call, Greg. Go ahead. We'll stick with you.
What I'm strategically doing is muting.
Okay. Well, that is strategic.
I got 4 rings, right? So.
Well,
and
we'll
then
just
after
wait
the
here.
4th ring, the answering machine picks up. So
Okay. Well, everything
see if
seems
that-
good here. So.
Yeah. So I was doing my strategic blocking at the time.
Oh, okay. You're sitting on the phone itself to muffle the. Okay.
I forgot to put it in the washing machine. So that happens.
All right.
All right.
Hit fluff.
So everybody's pointing out that, things for the Democrats are actually looking very good despite this tax bill, and that the tax bill isn't going to reverse Republican fortunes. But the Democrats shouldn't get too complacent
Oh, no.
because people always say that. God knows why. People are so angry. I don't understand words about getting complacent. Rachel Maddow had this incredible piece the other day on the show where she was showing how many new non-incumbent candidates there were going to be for Congress from the two sides.
Okay. Yes. Challengers of. Okay.
So you look at challengers the year before the actual election because, it takes time to declare, raise money. And she looked at candidates who were only candidates who had already raised $5,000, so they had to be semi-serious.
That's because you would not find them otherwise. If you're looking at the FEC, the only way you'll find them is if they've raised $5,000 and reported. Mm-hmm. If you're searching the newspaper, you could find more, but whatever.
So
That's
basically, the difference between Democrats and Republicans for the past 10 years
yes.
for each cycle was relatively even. But there were a couple of small spikes. For example, I think it was 2010 in favor of the Republicans, 2-1, new candidates wanting to get into the game.
Yes. Okay.
And this year, the Republicans are trailing the Democrats. The Democrats are leading the Republicans by like 5-1, by unprecedented numbers of Democrats who are wanting to run and get into the game.
Well, that's good.
And the idea is that your political fortunes will determine whether or not you want to bother trying to run, possibly losing. But you're going to do that if you think the environment is good for you, and you're not going to do that if you think the environment is bad for you. The other side will do it because they think it's good for them.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's a gauge. It's a thumb on the scale. It's a way of trying to get an idea of which way the wind is blowing. And just like the generic ballot, you never see numbers like this in favor of the Democrats. This just never happened before.
Okay. They could have some enthusiasm, I suppose, is one way to put it.
There you go.
Yeah, I had to use it.
So you have a number of things showing that things are going the Democrats' way, despite the fact that they passed this bill and everybody's patting themselves on the back. And the news media is shorthand saying this is an incredibly good win for the Republicans, which, if you're talking about enriching themselves, that's true. If you're talking about a 24-hour headline cycle, it's true. In terms of a Pyrrhic victory, it's also true, and some of the smarter outlets are picking up on that and saying, this is not an unmitigated win for the Republicans. They just passed the bill that everybody hates. What happens?
Yes. Well, that's a good question.
Right. So that's where we're at on that. So again, I just, the day after the Republicans declare for themselves that they've won big is always a day to, avoid watching the media too much because it'll upset your stomach, but also just watching them as objectively as you can to try to figure out what it is they're exactly saying. And there's a lot of defensiveness about the Republicans declaring that they've won, which is quite different than unmitigated, joy.
Yeah.
At the same time, there are people who have unmitigated joy. And, Paul Ryan was one of them. He just relished the fact that he actually was able to pass this and now he can retire. And I looked at it yesterday and, my first thought was, I don't think that the Republicans, given how unpopular this bill is, polls in the 20s to low 30s, which is terrible for a tax cut.
True.
I don't look at them telling everybody this is such a wonderful thing because I think they do believe it. But the question is, why do they believe it? Do they believe it because they are ideologically committed to doing this no matter what?
Surely.
That's one possibility.
Yes.
Some of them are. I think Paul Ryan fits in that category. But I would advance a second possibility in terms of why they are so thrilled about this.
You would, but
Yeah,
you're not going
they're
to?
really stupid.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
They think
that could be it.
This is going to be a big winner for them. They actually believe it.
Well, that's what's in the box that they ordered.
Right? The third part of being stupid is they actually think this is going to work for the economy.
Yes, and that's
Right?
what they learned
This whole
in
trickle
school.
down thing with the peasants, they truly believe that this is going to work, even though Kansas and, everything else that the economists are telling them that it's not. So there's that. There's maybe a group of them that would love to do this and then say, okay, well, now that we have this huge deficit that we didn't care about last week, but all of a sudden is a big deal now, because we didn't realize how big it was going to be. We're lying about that, but that's what we're telling you.
Right.
Now that we know that the deficit is this big, we have to cut your Medicare and Social Security.
Yes,
There's
and
a
they're
group
very
of
much
that.
into that.
And there's another group of them that's saying, no, that's nonsense. The economy is going to grow and the whole problem is going to go away. And they're the really stupid ones.
They'll have some time to work it out, but not very much.
When they're home with their families when they decide to retire.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And then we'll have a whole new generation have to try and clean this up once again. All right,
Look
we'll
for
take a short break.
retirements, folks. That's what's going to be your key.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Good morning, everybody who may just be joining us. Rewind if you missed the first segment, but if you're just joining us now and can't rewind because you're listening to it live, Greg Dworkin's still with us to recap our first segment, I guess, and hit on some of the finer points still to be highlighted for those of you joining us live. All right, Greg, let's see. Where were we when we last we
were talking about how the environment is good for Democrats and how this tax bill isn't all that popular. And just as we were ending the segment, I said, watch Republican retirements, because as they start to look at these polling numbers come in and they get the sense that they're going to get clobbered in November, we'll see what happens. There's also new information from some of the polls about just how badly they're doing with millennials. So the idea there is when you're young, you fix – not permanently, but you fix fairly solidly your political leanings. And so the Republicans are in danger of losing an entire generation for things like not caring about the environment and for things like not caring about infrastructure and just being as obnoxious as they are and being just complete a-holes like Leader Trump does. Now, speaking of leader a-holes, here's a piece from The Hill I just added to the end of the list here.
Okay.
McConnell to reporter, I understand your job is to use the Democratic talking points on the tax bill. I mentioned this, but here's the exact story. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell mocked a reporter's question. It was Frank Thorpe from NBC, saying he understood the reporter's job is to use Democratic talking points. And the question was, what do you say to Senator Schumer when he says you guys are going to rue the day you pass this bill, that the politics of passing long-term corporate tax cuts with short-term individual cuts is going to catch up to you guys.
Okay. What do you say?
You don't say anything. You say, we believe this product will do two extremely important things: provide middle-class tax relief and provide business changes that will make us more competitive. Right? Corporations are sitting on record profits and so on and so forth. So Zach Carter at the Huffington Post had this short little tweet storm, which I thought was interesting. The conservative talking point that the media has tricked everyone into hating the tax bill assumes some really crazy things about how people think about politics.
Okay.
The idea here is that because most middle-class and low-income households won't receive an immediate tax hike in year one, these households must automatically like the tax bill. It only polls badly because the dirty media pulled one over on everybody. And to step out of this little tweet storm here, here's the thing. You tell people, and this goes back to the house is burning down, but here's your $1,000. You're telling everybody that for a couple of years, you're going to get a fairly small tax break compared to the rich, who's going to have a permanent tax break. But in a couple of years, that's going to go away, and your kids won't see it, and you should like it and shut up. And that's a great selling point, and everybody's going to love that.
Yes.
Because people are so stupid that as soon as they see an extra $10 in their paycheck, they're going to say, oh, my God, Trump is wonderful. We don't have to bow down to him.
And they really mean that part.
And they mean it. That's what I said. They're stupid. So the idea here is that because most middle-class and low-income households won't receive an immediate tax hike in year one, these households must automatically like the tax bill. It only polls badly because the dirty media pulled one over on everybody. Never mind the 10-year analysis that shows most households getting tax hikes later on. It's next year that counts, and then everybody will love it, etc. Imagine for a moment you're not a fabulously wealthy professional conservative, and your taxes are going to go down next year by, say, $500.
Okay.
People like money, but they're also social. They have actual beliefs. They can see other people are getting tens of thousands of dollars. And what's more, they can see that the stuff benefiting enormously wealthy people, the corporate rate cut, for instance, was never in jeopardy, while the stuff that helps middle-class people, that all depends. They can see the bill was written to help millionaires and billionaires, that all of the stuff for the family and people they know was cobbled together as an afterthought. And by the way, it's going to disappear. That sends a really powerful message about who the bill's authors really care about. That's why the bill's unpopular and why it's going to remain unpopular. So, he's making the point that it isn't a question of just how do we sell this crap sandwich. Mm-hmm. It's still a crap sandwich. It's not something it's the problem is with the dog food, not with the campaign.
Yeah. And of course I think even if you don't understand the tax policy,
the dogs don't want to eat it,
yeah.
So there's not much you can do about that.
But it's a nice can, so we have that, and you can recycle it, and that's good. It meshes so well with the also very obvious leftover from the campaign that Trump hasn't released his taxes and won't, and everybody always suspects if you don't. I guess we don't really know what people do when presidents don't release their taxes, because they do always, except for this one. But
right, that you're absolutely right. Yeah. That's another thing, and the Democrats
suspicious.
Ought to, and I suspect will, make the point that Trump hasn't released his taxes now even more important than ever.
Yeah, and everybody has an inkling, let's say, and you'd be 100% correct in that inkling, that this tax bill benefits him enormously, and part of the reason he's not showing his taxes is that you will find out that is true in black and white, whereas if he hides it, he thinks he has at least the opportunity to tell you, and he does take every opportunity to tell you, oh, this tax bill is going to be terrible for me. I'm going to be soaked. I'm paying through the nose because I'm a terrible, terrible tax planner. Even though I campaigned on the notion that I was an awesome tax planner and was so good at it that's why you needed to elect me, to help you be able to cheat the tax man just as effectively as I did.
I did just what I promised. I cheated them and I got benefit.
Only I can fix it. I alone can fix it. And I will.
Only
and
I
I'll
alone
fix it
will
for
benefit.
I alone for benefits. Yes, exactly right. You mentioned there's other story that said something like, what was it, a dozen or so lawmakers that they had identified who
Kyle
also...
Griffin just tweeted that this moment, so to give you
Um,
an idea of how it's going around. It's not just Corker. Dozens of lawmakers and President Trump stand to reap a tax windfall thanks to a loophole inserted in the GOP tax overhaul bill, according to a review of federal financial disclosures. So this is a CNBC story. The provision would also create generous tax savings for President Trump the measure reduces the tax rate on pass-through income derived from real estate. Those benefits will now go to roughly 4 dozen Republican House and Senate members who voted for the bill, according to an analysis of personal financial disclosures for CNBC by the Center for Responsive Politics. That's the story.
All right. And I had seen one yesterday. I think I may have retweeted it, but I didn't put it aside. But somebody had also done the similar calculations for inside the White House. 10 cabinet members also have major businesses. I don't know. There's probably only about perhaps 15 when you're counting non-departmental heads that also sit at cabinet level. But Trump, Betsy DeVos, they have the relative savings based just on the real estate tax provisions, or the estate tax, I should say, rather. The estate tax provisions alone would save Trump $2 million. Also up in the $2 million plus category, Betsy DeVos, Linda McMahon, Rex Tillerson, Wilbur Ross, Steve Mnuchin, Sonny Perdue, Robert Lighthizer, who we forget is a cabinet level, is a U.S. trade representative, but another billionaire, I guess. David Shulkin, VA, in case you've forgotten, Dan Coates, and Elaine Chao, all saving big bucks in the estate tax. Elaine Chao.
Who's Elaine Chao married to?
That's right. The guy who runs the Senate thing. Oh, she's only saving $700,000, so she's small potatoes in all this. So
you can't claim Mitch McConnell made any money on this, right?
Everyone from Lighthizer down is less than $2 million. It's $2 million up, Purdue and above, and then Lighthizer, Shulkin, Coates are in the $1 million to $2 million range. Elaine Chao, the poor relation, $700,000. So there you go. Elaine Chao will pocket the $700,000, and Mitch McConnell, her husband, will see none of it. I'm sure they have a firewall between their bank accounts.
Absolutely. Michael Musson points out, it certainly doesn't help that people like Obamacare and Trump is saying, I killed it, but I told people not to talk about it so the public wouldn't catch on. And that's one of the bizarre things about it. Trump can't help but brag about how smart he is. So he tells everybody that he pulled one over on you.
Yeah. Well,
because that's going to help sell the bill.
Somehow, yes. Yeah, I don't know. It's Matt Iglesias has been very active in the last couple of days making this point, and Brian Beutler, and it makes sense because they used to hang out together, and they think similarly, and pointing out just specifically how many campaign promises and how much of the campaign rhetoric is not just directly contradicted, but they just runs roughshod over what Trump told his audiences he was going to do, why they cheered him, and why everybody thought hanging the populist sign around the neck of a purported billionaire who loves nothing better than to lord it over others and slather his stuff in gold spray paint could possibly be populist. And he isn't. That's the answer. And you knew it then, and now you have proof, and big deal. That and $1 billion will get you a tax cut.
Right. Oh, by the way, here's an update on the Virginia drawing for next week. This is from Graham Moomaw, Moomaw, who's a Virginia politics reporter for RDT News. It's a little ominous here. It says the details on the big HD 94 drawing. I guess that's the Newport News area. When December 27th, possibly 11 a.m., where Richmond, possibly the Patrick Henry building. How? This is what got me. The canister method.
The canister method. Okay.
The canister method.
The infamous. Yeah, I guess that's for lot drawing. So I wonder, will we have a fight at some point? How many lots should go in there? Should you be blindfolded?
Just the canister sounds ominous to me. Yeah. I don't know what's in that canister, or whether or not you're supposed to let it out. And if you do let it out, is it toxic?
Yes. Release the Kraken. And whoever he eats, the other guy gets the seat. Why not?
So let's see. With incumbent delegate David Yancey, Republican Newport News, and Democratic challenger Shelley Simons tied after a recount in the 94th District. I mentioned that because I knew 94th District. I had no clue as to where the 94th District was.
It doesn't look like that on the map, but if they say so.
Is Newport News a conservative area?
It should be. It's right in the middle of the big naval station. Newport News, Hampton Roads is a big naval base. So there's going to be a lot of military. But, yeah, I mean, the otherwise the general population is probably relatively mixed. I guess that's why you have a 50-50 race.
Yeah, but still, I think all credit has to go to those people who live in the area, who not only came out and voted for Shelley Simons, but also encouraged
Also voted
their
for the
family
other.
members and everybody else to come out and vote in an election like this.
Yes.
In an off-year election.
All credit,
And,
though.
it's one of those every vote matters. I don't think you can say it enough.
That's
so
why the guy
every
voted
one of you
twice.
who got your normally dormant family to go out and cast those extra votes, we love you.
Yes, except for the one person who was already had a ballot in hand and decided I'll just mark it as many times as I can
Yeah.
and see if that helps.
Vote early, vote often. So the board is using the same random drawing method it used in the past to decide the order in which candidates appear on the ballot. Under that method, officials will write down the name of each candidate on a piece of paper. Hopefully you can read the name. It wouldn't be my handwriting.
Cross it out.
But each name in a film canister. Then draw one canister at random from a bowl or a hat.
Oh, it's really the hat.
Can you see that? You remember the old-fashioned film rolls?
Yeah.
You used to open up a little metal
where are they going to get
garbage
those
pail.
now?
It was about the size of your thumb, and you'd undo the top and take out the film roll, and it was
35
packed that way
millimeter
so that
film.
the light wouldn't already spoil the film.
Do you guys
This
know what
is for
film
you
is?
young people who were born post-digital age. In the old days, you actually had to thread the film into your camera.
Yes.
And the whole idea was to thread it in such a way that the first 3 picture slots weren't ruined by the light.
Right. And then, and when you were done.
Just dating myself, but I just want to give you an idea how it used to, and of course the cameras are made out of stone, and the film was made out of leaves from a yucca tree, But in the old days, that's how it worked. And then these things would come in these little canisters, film canisters. Right?
I don't know where they're going to get those.
They probably put those aside. They saved
saved them
500 of them in case there's ever a recount in Virginia.
It's a whole room in the Capitol full of film canisters.
Empty ones, right? So then you take the name, you put it in a film canister. Maybe you do 5 for one guy, 5 for the other guy, and then you put them in a bowl, and then you take the canister. Or it's better if you put it in a Mexican hat,
right?
Because that'll make Trump mad. And then what you do is you pick a name, and then you open the canister if you can.
Pick a canister,
and then you can read the name or whether or not the light has spoiled the name, and then you have to go do the whole drawing again in another month.
What a weird thing! I wonder whether they have.
But for you process people, I just thought you'd really enjoy, knowing exactly what the process was.
That's really amazing, and it's good that they have the canisters handy. Back in our day, of course, I go back to the days when the cameras were not only they were made of stone, but inside the camera there was a tiny little like pterodactyl type dinosaur who would then chisel onto a piece of stone the picture he saw through the lens, like the Flintstones.
Yeah, exactly right. Of course, I remember
Very
Polaroid.
artistic dinosaurs. Yes, right. Oh, and there were no canisters.
Right. I mean, the picture stunk, but at least you got to see it right away.
That's what you didn't look like a minute ago.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's how that will work, and I just thought our listeners and readers would enjoy knowing that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there anything else that we could do? Steve Schmidt says, the appalling sycophancy led by the vice president at yesterday's cabinet meeting is an affront to our democratic norms. The president should not be venerated by his cabinet the way a pack of miscreant cronies would bow and scrape to an autocrat leading a banana republic. Steve Schmidt has had some pointed words about the Trump administration. He's not a fan.
Send a link over to that tweet, although it was very widely circulated. I did notice that, and I looked at it, and a lot of people were referring to Pence's impromptu, I guess, remarks to the president at a cabinet meeting about how awesome he was. As it was almost prayer-like in the way things were put. I did not recognize it as a prayer, of course, but maybe evangelicals find that more familiar as a prayer. But a 2-minute, I don't know what you would call it. I would ordinarily say diatribe, but that's not quite what he was doing. But he had a paean, I guess, to the awesomeness of Trump, through which, by the way, Trump sits there with his arms sternly crossed. He's not sure, I guess, what's going on. Or maybe he was impatient and he wanted to get to it already. I understand you're kissing my ass, but come on, get it over with already. Or maybe he hit the Diet Coke button and the person with the Coke has to wait until whoever's speaking is finished to come in the room with the can. I don't know. But he looked rather impatient about getting all this effusive praise. And normally he does a weird grin and nods. I don't know what was up. Constipation is what it looked like. I'm not going to diagnose remotely, though.
All right. So I will finish with some Nate Silver observations that he's tweeting this morning about the tax bill. He says Republicans and some pundits are taking voter concerns about the tax bill literally, but not seriously.
Oh, yes. You're not supposed to do that.
Okay. People are wrong about some of the specifics. More voters will be getting a tax cut than realize it, but their general instincts about the bill are reasonably correct. They're not likely to change all that much. So really, that's the point. It isn't, I think it's a ridiculous argument to get into about whether or not this percentage versus that percentage of people are going to see money. And if it is, how much is it going to be? And, technically, a lot of people can get a $1, cut. And so you could say, oh, look at all these people that are getting a cut. And practically speaking, I'm exaggerating the amount, but from a practical point of view, they can say, yeah, big deal. What else do you got for me?
Yes,
and not be terribly happy about it. So if you're going to concentrate just on the numbers, the Democrats learned this a long time ago with healthcare. That ain't it. It's the overall perception of what this means, not what the numbers say. And if the Republicans are already relying on the numbers to sell this turkey, ain't happening.
Yeah. I saw a lot of tweets in a similar vein responding to the idea that the average family or the average American gets a $2,000 tax cut. People
right. In such and such a year, Bobby Bonds and I had an average of 37 and a half home runs, that kind of thing.
Exactly. There's all variations on the theme that this one and Michael Jordan have an average of 3 NBA championships between them, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll have to, I guess we wait and see whether or not people decide either that their company giving them a bonus and then taxing it at 40+%, by the way, are happy about that, and whether they really think it was Trump that did it, and do things really trickle down that fast? I got $1,000 before the bill was signed.
The point they're making at 538, I'll just read from the paragraph here. More importantly, voters probably aren't being quite so single and literal minded about whether or not they're getting a tax cut. Instead, they're using polling questions like these to signal their overall skepticism and discomfort with the bill. Discomfort that also registers when they're asked other questions about the bill that have nothing to do with their personal finances. For example, concern about the deficits, what money it takes out of the general revenue pool to use for other things like infrastructure. And the GOP bill also suffers, this 538 article points out, from not having popular messengers and from not having a trustworthy message. Trump's approval is at 37, close to its all-time low. Republicans in Congress have even worse numbers. They're in the 20s. Party leader Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are highly unpopular. They've misled voters about some of the consequences of the bill, although so have Democrats. And they've lost their traditional polling lead on Democrats, in which party the public trusts more on taxes. So you have untrustworthy messengers, unpopular messengers, trying to sell an unpopular message, and then wondering how come it's not all falling together. Why is it not all, coming to the point where people love us now?
Yes.
Plus one last point, major point. Voters are usually change averse when it comes to complicated bills that affect their finances. And everybody knows this was rushed through in a couple of weeks. You can't undo that.
That part, no. That's true.
So that's where a lot of the skepticism comes from. Wait a minute. You're changing everything. This is the first big thing in 31 years, and you're rushing it through in a week or two, and you don't even know what's in it. You've already made so many mistakes, you had to vote twice on it, and you forgot about the alternative minimum tax for corporations, so you had to go back and change it. You clearly don't have a good handle on what the heck's in the bill in the first place, and now you want us to trust you that, no, it's all going to work out because we're masters of the universe and have total control of all the details. That's the overall larger message, and that's one of the reasons why it's not going to work for them.
Well, in this age of norm shattering, it's time to reconsider, as you mentioned, unpopular messenger, untrustworthy messenger. Normally we don't shoot messengers. I'm wondering whether it's time that that political norm has also been shattered, collateral damage in the norm shattering rampage that Donald Trump has brought us. Of course, it's metaphorical. We don't actually shoot messengers. We may, let's say we shoot them a dirty glance. It's now okay because I'm tired of all this politically correct stuff, you know?
Right.
It's run amok. What's happening on campuses these days is making me sick. Shoot messengers. Go ahead. Who says I can't?
Right. Anyway, with that, I think we'll wrap up with that. But I think that's the overall picture there that I think is important to stress. And this is Thursday, and I'm speaking with my friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. What else are you going to talk about on the show today?
First of all, tomorrow is Friday. I'll probably talk about that.
That'll take an hour.
That was good. Yeah, right. Now we have plenty. Let's see. If you're interested in a brief preview, well, here's something you might be interested in. Just as a side note, weird story. Did you happen to see the story of the baby girl born using a frozen embryo of record age?
I did not.
This is a baby has been born. This is kind of weird. So this will be interesting for the Life Begins at Conception crowd. A baby born from a 24-year-old frozen embryo, carried to term and birthed by a 25-year-old woman, by the way. She is a year and a half older than her daughter.
Yeah, it would have been cool if it were the other way around, right?
Yes, I know. And eventually, I guess that's coming. And lots of people had very interesting comments to make. For instance, that this child has been, according to pro-life theory, as they like to call it, the kid is born old enough to drink and vote. It also owes back taxes and will be kicked off her parents' insurance in 3 years. Plus, also, by the way, already born too old for Roy Moore, also observed by many of the people out there, but poses a real conundrum. I'll be interested to know what people think of this, and I assume that the answer is hypocrisy / whatever we need to say, because I got the inkling, although it wasn't obvious from the article, that this is one of those folks who believes in the snowflake baby adoption theory, that if we're going to use other than, say, traditional methodology for giving birth to a baby or conceiving a baby, that you ought to adopt these embryos that are frozen people and waiting for birthing. And so they went ahead and did it. And now they're going to have I assume they'll just cast the whole thing aside and just say, well, God works in strange and mysterious ways and here's a miracle or whatever, as opposed to saying, last year I believed that this person was 24 years old. Now I believe she's an infant. And I don't know how to reconcile that, except who knows?
It's a simple deal, We've talked about this on the show before. Speaking of canisters, you have a canister of embryos, yes, and you have a 7-year-old girl. There's a fire in the room, and you have to grab one. And if you don't grab the girl, don't even talk to me. You're a horrible human being.
And you'll have problems in court as well. It's a weird thing. It's an interesting philosophical question. Don't know how anybody is going to be able to answer it, particularly these parents, but it does raise a number of issues. And if if life begins at conception, or if an embryo is a person, I guess that's another question. Can you freeze people for 24 years? I don't think you can. They're not up to that technology yet. But if anyone still believes that those embryos were people, I invite you to step into the freezer for 24 years and find out.
Right.
But I bet you'll.
So I'll leave you with that.
Results. All right.
We don't have time to settle the whole pro-choice, pro-life thing.
Like an hour.
A few minutes before the break. But okay. in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the show, folks. And I'll be back sometime, but not next week or
24 years.
Yeah.
Not Monday. I'm certain of that. And I think we'll be back in place on Wednesday. We'll have to just see how crazy things are. We'll work it out, you and I.
We'll work it out.
And see whether people are anxious for new live shows.
Right.
Or not.
If it doesn't work, we'll just send it back to the Senate for one more vote.
Yes, right. Change the name, draw a slash through the show, and listen to it again.
All righty. Take care.
Thanks very much, Greg. You do the same. Have a good weekend. Don't freeze yourself for 24 years or any years. Please. We would miss you too much. And that's true. I'm not being facetious. I know it sounded weird, but this is true. This is a real story, and I picked it up from CBS News. And so therefore, it's not fake or something like that. I don't know if Donald Trump thinks I assume he thinks everybody is fake news. Well, this is about, this has taking a pro-life position, even though it doesn't make any sense. So maybe he believes this one is true. Baby born it's a record-breaking 24-year-old frozen embryo. What record? Home runs in a single season. Amazing kid, really, honestly. As an embryo, to break that iconic record is really something, and I want to applaud you. But anyway, no, the record obviously is how long the embryo stayed frozen. A Tennessee couple. Of course it's a couple from Tennessee. What does that mean? I don't know. A Tennessee couple has welcomed a baby girl who grew from an embryo. Look at the language you have to use in all this. Who grew from an embryo that had been frozen for 24 years. It's believed to be, and it's just belief at this point, and you can believe anything you want. That's one of the freedoms we have in this country, especially if it's religious. And this isn't, but it has to do with a baby, and so therefore it is all of a sudden religious. I don't know why that is. It just happened over the last couple of years. It's believed to be the longest frozen embryo ever to result in a birth. That is to say, chronologically, the longest time spent frozen, not, this one is X number of microns in length. Let's take this one. It's very big. What a big embryo this is. Let's use it. On November 25th, 2017, Emma Wren was born to Benjamin and Tina Gibson. This is interesting all by itself. What does this mean? Benjamin and Tina Gibson. Emma Wren. Is she Emma Wren Gibson, or is her last name Emma Wren? Is she the Wren's frozen embryo? And they, what? This is very interesting. So it's got all kinds of implications, not all of which will be answered in this CBS article, I'm sure. Plus the break is coming up. Tina Gibson, now 26, became pregnant in March of 2017 as a result of a frozen embryo transfer before the donated embryo was transferred into her uterus at the National Embryo Donation Center in Knoxville. I didn't even realize we had nationalized that operation. It had been cryopreserved for more than 24 years, according to an NEDC news release. By the way, healthy baby, 6 pounds, 8 ounces, 20 inches long, considerably longer than she was as an embryo. So that must be the record that we're talking about here. We'll get to more details and more weirdness about it, and then get the hell off the subject and onto the news right after this next break. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And I'm just sort of dancing to the music here, deciding whether or not I want to bring it back down. Do I want to keep it rolling just to groove to it? I lost my place in watching the time. That's the problem with this 1 minute break. And I know the way to engineer the problems away, but I haven't done it yet. My life is too hectic. I don't know. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Oh, by the way, Ben Tribbett, who's watching closely, I mentioned him to you the other day, not Larry Sabato, right? Watching closely on the next recount issue. Let's see, this one in the recount of House of Delegates District 28, set to start soon. But the judge, he says, has taken the unusual step of barring media. Post is headed to court. I guess the Washington Post headed to court to request access. Even yesterday's proceedings, I don't think were, or the press was allowed in, but they weren't allowed to film or use their phones and tweet live updates. And the people who were tweeting live updates were having to run out into the hallway, tweet quick updates, and then run back in. So there's still a couple of recounts looming out there. I don't know if anybody expects anything serious to change as a result of those that are left. Anyway, so but this last one that they overturned, not the very last of the races that they need to recount. So let's see, comments that came in along the way. By the way, we'll catch up with in just a few minutes. Let's finish up with the CBS News article. It is an interesting one, and it is sort of, I mean, it's news. It's in the news. I can tell you it right here. CBS News. Does that answer the question for you? What am I supposed to do? The site's URL is called news. So where were we? Yes, Tina Gibson, who is now 26, became pregnant in March of 2017. And even that's questionable, right? Just, philosophically speaking. Does she become pregnant, or did she just get an embryo implanted in her? And so therefore, I guess her body was, well, this feels like pregnancy. I might as well go ahead. And it obviously worked. But what do we even mean by becoming pregnant? But okay, She's 26 now, became pregnant in March of 2017 with this frozen embryo. Oh, yes, and by the way, here's the picture caption of the baby, which identifies her as Emma Wren Gibson. So that solves that question. Just Wren is her middle name. But I got worried there for a second, like, wow, are we really talking about, like, if we're really one of these snowflake adoption people? Now, usually in adoption, you append your surname to the child's name and take care of things that way. That's usually the point of adoption. But I wonder, I could see if people really felt that they were rescuing snowflake babies from suspended animation in some way, and that their life began at conception, and we've, somehow horribly mucked up God's plan by freezing them for 24 years. Although who knows what the plan could have been. And interesting question, what God's plan is for this particular girl born 24 years after her conception. I mean, if you're actually into that idea, would you ever consider, for instance, giving the child the surname of the embryonic donor and say that this person became a person 24 years ago as a result of the fertilization of this other woman's eggs, and so they belong to this other person. Well, we'll take care of them, we'll adopt them, but we're going to call them by the name they would have gotten had they not been frozen originally and been carried to term. What a strange idea eventually that'll happen. But it didn't happen here, in case you were worried about really having your mind blown. Gibson, the adult Gibson, spent her, I was going to say the 26-year-old Gibson, not the 25-year-old Gibson. 26-year-old Gibson spent her pregnancy, if it is her pregnancy, carrying an embryo that actually had been conceived and frozen in October of 1992. Now, you can get a more specific date than just that, but they want to protect the privacy of somebody. I don't know. October of 1992, just a year and a half after her own birth. So as a toddler, this other Emma was conceived when Tina was a year and a half old. But the difference between the two of them, Emma was frozen for 24 years. Tina was not. Tina went to college in the meantime. This embryo has been frozen for 24 and a half years. At the time, I was only 25, Gibson said, meaning at the time of the birth, I was only 24, or at the time of the implantation, I was only 25. She made it sound like she was 25 when the embryo was frozen. That's not the case. I was like, she says, because she's kind of millennial, I was like, I'm 25 years old. If this embryo would have been born when it was supposed to have been, God's plan, we could have been best friends. It's just a miracle. We're so excited, and she is such a gift from God. And man, not God and man, but God, gift from God, and man, we're just so blessed to have her. And I agree. You're always blessed to have a live daughter. That's nice. I wonder, did they, I don't think it says in here, and maybe I didn't read all the way through it. Did they have any hand in selecting it? Did they ask for the oldest embryo, like as a rescue mission, or was the embryo her parents' embryo? I mean, I would assume that would get mentioned. Like, was there a genetic match? Was there some reason why the 24-year-old embryo would have worked better for her body than some other, less chance of rejection, blood type match, anything? I don't know. Anybody versed in this? Maybe we should ask some medical experts on IVF to weigh in on that. Or just say, would you answer the question, please? I'd like to know. National Embryo Donation Center. There we go. They're definitely into the rescue idea. Embryo Donation Center. I didn't think about that when I read it the first time. The research staff at the University of Tennessee Preston Medical Library reports that baby Emma now holds the all-time record for the longest frozen embryo to result in a birth. Emma is such a sweet miracle, new dad Benjamin Gibson said. I think she looks pretty perfect to have been frozen all those years ago. Did you think she was going to come out looking like the what, Ice King or whatever. What's the name of the opposite of the heat miser? Is it freeze cold miser? Is it Mr. What did they call the guy in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? Is he also a miser? For some reason that doesn't come immediately to mind. But the Winter Warlock, is that the problem? Well, she was frozen this whole time, so she's going to have like an icicle nose. Probably not. It's all genetics, you see. NEDC medical director, that's the National Embryo Donation Center, the director, Dr. Jeffrey Keenan, said he hopes the Gibson story is, quote, a clarion call, here we go, a clarion call to all couples who have embryos in long-term storage to consider this life-affirming option for their embryos. That would mean, I think, if you have embryos in long-term storage, you heathen bastard, and they're not being stored at the National Embryo Donation Center where we can implant them and give birth to them, then you're worse than Hitler. But give them to me and put them in my freezer and you're cool. No pun intended. CBS News' medical contributor, Dr. Tara Narula, I'm guessing, said Emma's birth is, quote, a validation of the science of IVF. And that's true, right? Narula, I'm not certain how she pronounces it, said the difference between an embryo made 24 years ago and one made now is that the science has evolved. It's all different. It's all ball bearings these days. Before, the embryos were slowly frozen at earlier stages of development. You could just put them in a freezer, I guess. Now they're flash frozen, like your broccoli, at slightly older stages, and better protectants are used, resulting in improved chances of successful implantation. The other issue, Narla said, is about the hundreds of thousands of embryos that are unused by the couples who undergo IVF. And here's a question. For many, it can be an agonizing decision to decide if they should be discarded or donated to other families. These snow babies, or babies held in suspended animation, they used to call them snowflake babies, I guess. Now, maybe snowflake now has a negative connotation, so they're now snow babies. They can really end up being a win-win for some families who have really been struggling with infertility, Narla said. And I guess they can be. If for whatever reason IVF can't work for you because you don't have viable, you don't have viable eggs, gametes. You don't have, whatever it is, whether it's you or your internal organs. And I guess your internal organs have to be in good shape. Your uterus has to be in good shape in order to do this. But I guess if for whatever reason you're unable to produce the reproductive cells necessary, then you would depend on a donated embryo. And it could be a good thing. This one is a little strange and, of course, a little extreme. And I'm sure that the parents here convinced themselves that they were doing something extra special. And it is. It's made the news. It's given us all something to discuss. I don't think they're going to spend a great deal of time trying to reconcile the philosophical contradictions of it. And maybe they shouldn't. They're going to be busy enough as it is raising the child. The rest of us can consider it. They can just go on, as far as I'm concerned, and have a happy time raising a regular child that is will turn 1 year after they were born, not 24 years after they were frozen. But I guess that really just posed some scientific issues, and ones that we knew were at the heart of the abortion issue, right? If you can freeze one of these things, it's not a person. And although they may one day get to the place technologically where they're able to freeze living, born adult people and revive them later so that they can fly to Mars and be attacked en route by monstrous aliens that have stowed away on board, or whatever mission you choose for them, then I guess you could revive the argument at that stage. But if you're not freezing them the same way, I mean, if you can't, this embryo was slow frozen at an early stage of development, early enough that slow freezing in the same way with an older embryo even, much less a live human person. And what you get with a live human person is a dead, frozen body. And what you get with the embryos is 24 years later, quarter century later, you can just, I guess, thaw it out. Don't microwave it. Thaw it out using approved practices and results in a person. Now, at the end of the process, obviously at the beginning of the process, it's clearly something else. Because if you subjected a human being alive to the same procedure, you would not have a live human being at the end. That's the difference. That's science. But so what? Screw science, right? It's all up in the air anyway. Teach the controversy. Something. Okay, on to other things that have nothing to do with this poor baby Emma. Are all Emmas a very popular name, but they seem to be in trouble a lot. And I think we've got the causation backwards. There's lots of Emmas and lots of trouble in the world. Put that all together and you're going to get a lot of... Wasn't a baby Emma fell down the well? All right. That's two Emmas, so it's a pattern. I give up. Other things are happening. Here's an interesting one, off our beaten path. But among the things that Joan McCarter reminded us yesterday are on the year-end agenda for Congress, and at which they will fail. And in some cases, we're happy that they fail. The reauthorization of NSA surveillance programs, apparently now up in the air. This piece in the Washington Post, Karun is the first name, Karoun. I don't know if that's like a funky spelling of Karen or a real spelling of Karun. Last name being Demirjian. Karun Demirjian. It probably has nothing to do with it, and probably insulted that I called him Karen. Anyway, sorry about that. Key NSA surveillance programs reauthorization hits roadblock in Congress. Now, if you're up to speed on your NSA surveillance programs, you might be among the many who say, good, hooray, these things suck. I'm more interested in whatever happened to about this story, the whatever happened to angle on this. House Republicans abandoned plans on yesterday, to vote on a long-term reauthorization of a powerful government authority to conduct foreign surveillance on U.S. soil, apparently succumbing to internal party demands. Remember, House Republicans. Internal party demands for time to negotiate an extension with more stringent limitations on when authorities can access Americans' communications. Isn't that interesting? There isn't any chance that a long-term FISA reauthorization has the support of the overall conference. Representative Mark Meadows, Republican of North Carolina, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, said Wednesday, referring to Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act of 2008, which gives the National Security Agency the authority to collect emails and other communications of overseas foreign targets from U.S. companies. You understand what's happening here? Lawmakers are expected to approve a short-term extension of the surveillance authority in its current form, keeping it in place until January 19th, being the same date, that is, the short-term budget extension pending before Congress this week is set to expire. Absent congressional action, the Section 702 program will expire at the end of the year, a worst-case scenario for the intelligence community, which has ranked an extension of the program as its highest legislative priority for 2017. But, of course, Donald Trump hates and mistrusts the intelligence community, and therefore Republicans in the Congress who want to get in good with him will say likewise. But Republican members of the Freedom Caucus, as well as members of the House Judiciary Committee, have insisted that Congress place more significant restrictions than GOP leaders were planning to impose on the FBI's ability, you see what's happening here, to access information about Americans who may have been in touch with foreign targets. Hell effing low, what's going on here? Do you remember? Are you old enough to remember? Are you older than Emma Wren Gibson? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, ordinarily we would say yes, absolutely, if you're listening to this podcast. But you know how these things go. Are you old enough to remember when the threat of non-authorization of a program like this, or non-extension of a program like this, even temporarily, meant getting a story in the Washington Post about how Democrats are pro-terrorist, objectively pro-terrorist and pro-ISIS, and although at the time it said pro-Al-Qaeda, and people were going to die and the blood was going to be on Democrats' hands because this was a vital program, and don't you believe in America? And if you mistrust our men and women in uniform or our intelligence services or, for God forbid, our Federal Bureau of Investigation, why you're some kind of commie bastard and deserve to die in a terrorist attack. I only wish they would find and target you, and then you'd know the pain of... You remember how these stories went. Now, though, what's happening? What's happening is the intelligence community and the FBI are finding, when they monitor foreign intelligence targets, that they are turning up evidence of Republicans colluding with them to the detriment of America's own national security. And so all of a sudden, the Republican conference in the House and elsewhere, in the name of civil libertarianism, of the sort that Rand Paul used to pretend he believed in, are looking to restrict the ability of the intelligence community and the FBI to use these tools to, well, as they used to say, stop terrorism, except the reason that they want to restrict their tools is because they are catching them colluding with Russia and who knows who else, and who knows whether or not, by the way, that counts directly or indirectly as colluding with foreign terrorists. You can't tell. When you're talking about Russian oligarchs and the way they make and launder their money, there's every chance in the world that accounts, funds are moving in and out of accounts, likewise controlled by people with terrorist connections as well, because they don't care. And in fact, if they can be said to care about terrorism at all, it may very well be the case that they are interested in slowly, keeping terrorism on a slow boil alive, or in suspended animation, like Emma, so that they can continue to use it to stoke American fears and divisions and keep us destabilized as a world power vis-a-vis their own growing world power in Russia. So I can't tell you exactly what's going on here, but I can tell you, in terms of what the Russians are up to and what they want out of this, but I can tell you it seems pretty painfully obvious that now that the targets of the intelligence community and FBI have come to include Republicans, now we want weaker surveillance programs. Now we want tighter controls of surveillance programs. If you're targeting brown people, more power to you. If you're targeting us white people, specifically we Republican white people, that is obviously beyond the pale, even though you're pale beyond all recognition. Lawmakers are expected to approve this short-term extension, though, right? Absent congressional action, the 702 program would expire, but Republicans in the Freedom Caucus don't even want it to continue anyway, and they want new restrictions on the FBI in particular. Party leaders had rallied around an effort from House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, he's still alive and still kicking, to pass a long-term extension of the Section 702 program that would have incorporated a requirement that the FBI seek a court order before viewing the contents of queries for information about Americans' communications in the program database. That is to say, first you got to seek a warrant and a court order to do the surveillance. Then you need a court order to look at the information that was gleaned from the court-ordered surveillance because something, because they could get caught. Basically, what he thinks he's looking for here is court orders required for unmasking, I think, is really what he's aiming at here. He's upset that the FBI and other intelligence-related agencies can look at redacted information about what FISA warrants are turning up and say that I want to find out who this person is talking to. It's redacted in here, but they're saying, I want to give you a bomb to blow up the president. And then I say, oh, who's this person that he's talking to who says, okay, I'm free at 4:00. Why don't we meet at the Starbucks? That's the guy I would like to find out about. Now you would need a court order to find out about that. I guess in the long run, it doesn't make any difference because the FISA courts pretty much approve almost every warrant ever applied for. I doubt very much whether any FISA court or any other court would look at a duly authorized, for whatever good that does you, FISA warrant and then say, yeah, you also, if they approve the FISA warrant, they're going to approve the unmasking too. But I guess they think, of course, that there was some horrible political scandal involved in the unmasking. Having been told in no uncertain terms that there really wasn't, and having learned that most people believe that that is the case, they now want to simply make unmasking illegal without a court order. Okay, whatever. We know what this is about. Now this is interesting. I guess they're trying to expand on a proposal originally floated, it says, by Adam Schiff, who is, of course, a Democrat and the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, I believe. But his proposal would only have applied to criminal cases. So now I guess no matter what the issue is, Republicans say, well, if you thought it was a good idea to require a court order for unmasking names involved in criminal cases, we're just simply going to say, we'll take that good idea and expand on it. And that is permissible petard hoisting, if you ask me. But by mid-afternoon Wednesday, Nunes told reporters that the reauthorization effort was dead for now and that decisions about how to proceed were being made, quote, above my pay grade. He's the House Intelligence Committee chair, but above his pay grade is where the decisions are being made. The House Rules Committee also canceled plans to review the proposed legislation on Wednesday afternoon. It's not clear whether congressional leaders expect to pass the short-term extension of the surveillance program as part of a must-pass spending bill that the House and Senate will vote on this week, or alongside it, in a separate vehicle, that is. Meadows told reporters late Wednesday that congressional leaders were polling the caucus to determine whether there would be enough votes to pass the measures together. The nearly 3-week extension of the government's existing authority under Section 702 would buy negotiators in the House and Senate time to work out remaining differences. The Senate Intelligence Committee has pushed for a much less restrictive proposal than the House's measures. So I guess Rand Paul being considerably less effective there than Devin Nunes or Mark Meadows. They would require the FBI only to request a ruling from the FISA court on the legality of the query for information about a known U.S. person from the Section 702 database before viewing its contents. The secret court considers any request for foreign intelligence or for a law enforcement purpose to be legal. So everybody wants an additional review, just for different reasons. Nunes said late Wednesday that the House had struck an agreement with the Senate about the particulars of a long-term extension, but that the Senate would never sign off on the deal, something he attributed mainly to Democrats. I'm not even certain that that's true. He guessed that in the new year, the compromised Section 702 language will be very similar to the legislation he filed late Tuesday. There's not much left to negotiate on, Nunes said. So, I don't know. Interesting development. Overall, of course, most surveillance-concerned Democrats, and that doesn't include all of us, are happy anytime they have difficulty reauthorizing 702 or any other of the FISA amendments in particular, or FISA at all, really, because it's a troublesome program that lends itself to abuse. My only interest in this is that all of a sudden Republicans who used to insist on the broadest powers possible have suddenly woken up to the necessity of restrictions and review and tighter controls because they have fallen under the microscope. Whereas before it was brown people and or Democrats or people that they could claim were Democrats, and they were all for arresting, harassing, or incarcerating them. Now that it's coming down to posing that problem for Republicans, well, gee whiz, now somebody's got to do something. So I thought that was interesting. All right. Yes. Also, a number of questions came in, and this would be a good time to dive back into comments, asking these questions and related ones. The tax bill has got a weird hitch to it that is causing, or reportedly causing, some consideration of delay in signing the bill. And so lots of questions about whether that caused problems of its own, what might be causing it, why they're doing it, and whether they would escape problems. Well, let's say we'll tease you with that question and answer it as completely as possible in the segment coming up after our final break, but we're not quite there yet. And let's see, other interesting stuff that we can include in their comment. Oh, look, Kate Sherrill commenting, I guess, on the in vitro fertilization question. The damn hipsters are out there asking, do you have anything vintage? That's how they got around to asking for the 24-year-old embryo. Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's really cool. That one was, okay. Frozen before they had the really super cool new technology. I like old school, like final frozen embryos. Arliss Bunny says, by the way, the opposite number of the heat miser was, in fact, the snow miser. For some reason, I don't remember that one quite as clearly, but thank you for chiming in with that. We'll be back with other important bits of information like that after this break. Welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio for our final segment. So many things that we could and should cram in, but that just gives us great material to bring you recorded shows during the break. I promise these things like it's easy to produce them, but hey, I'm excited about bringing you some of these stories. We were just teasing, I guess, the story of the delay now proposed in signing the tax bill. I guess everybody should. I got a piece from Bloomberg, and actually I think the more thorough of the two is one that I got from CBS News, but there were some comments and questions that came in today and yesterday that if I scroll down our KITM hashtag, we'll find them and then we can acknowledge them. Oh, by the way, along the way, there are a couple of other interesting comments that deserve some mention as well. Michael Musson saying, with regard to the canister method of deciding the now deadlocked House of Delegates race in Virginia, actually, they will draw both canisters and then cross one out and declare the Republican the winner. Also, Albert Titus suggesting that if Dems win, the Virginia Republicans will simply say, no, we meant best 2 out of 3. That's like possibly actually going to happen, so don't laugh just yet. Bill, by the way, making a mention of something else entirely, something a lot of you have mentioned, saying, hey, Kagro, can you interview that French singing lady you play during your breaks? I bet she has some opinions on the issues. She probably does. We at one point had identified her. One of the listeners was able to identify her. I don't play it. Justice plays it, but I'm sure it's entertaining. I actually have not heard it. I imagine it goes out on a live stream only, and I can't be listening to the live stream when I'm doing the show. That would really screw things up. So I'm curious. Maybe Justice, one of these days, send me that file. I'm curious to hear the song everybody's talking about. It really does draw a lot of notice. So good choice. You got a good ear. Everyone knows that's the case. And if you are at all unsure about that, stay tuned for Justice's program following ours and the other. Do you still produce other music programs for the Netroots Radio listening day? I'm not certain whether that's still the case, Justice, but I know you like to punctuate your shows with musical selections, and I guess this is one early example. So if you think Justice has a good ear during the breaks, stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day long. You ought to enjoy yourself, and then you'll have lots of trivia questions like who sings this particular song. Let's see. Other comments, David Paquette telling us, of course, credit where credit is due. It's truly amazing how Republicans can clearly enunciate fawning comments about Trump while their faces are firmly wedged between his butt cheeks, which is awfully dexterous of them. I admit that that's true. Here's something completely different. Parlio reminding us from overseas where things are serious all the time. Catalonia voting again today. And, I mean, they're in the hell of a situation as it is. Right? I mean, the big crackdown by the Spanish government. Catalonia voting again today. Give us a shout out, please. Here you are. Shout out. What do I say during a shout out? Well, I'll read your comment. How about that? Also, the big pro-independence rallies have been classified as rebellious and seditious. So now I am a seditious rebel. Congratulations to you, Parlio. I know that's been a lifelong dream of yours, and we all join you, at least in spirit, in becoming seditious rebels. Nothing like a little sedition in the morning, I guess. What else have we got here? Oh, another Michael Musson comment here. What's next? Charging workers another sick day after they return to work since they aren't really 100% yet? Referring to a Jared Bernstein tweet embedded here. Meanwhile, everyone was focusing on the tax scam, And I feel so annoyed, actually, just reading this. Like, every time I focused on something else, everybody said, no, focus on the tax scam. All right, I will. Oh, well, while you were focusing on the tax scam. All right, what did I miss this time? Team Trump was passing a new rule to let employers pocket wait persons' tips. I kid you not. Actually, pointing to another Twitter handle and an accompanying Washington Post story about that. And I had heard something about that, and I saw that there was a lot of attention to it. But I don't know. I was instructed to focus on the tax scam, so I did. And now look what happened. I'll share that tweet with you so that you can follow it and read the story linked therein. Or perhaps we'll just include the story if we don't get to it any other way. But okay, let's see. So that brings us up to date with that comment. But let me keep scrolling back so that I can get to some of these other interesting stories and queries that came up. Michael was asking this question yesterday, and there was at least one other person asking similar questions about this delay and whether or not it would cause problems. So at first, the only word was Trump was considering delaying signing the tax bill until January 3rd. And there was some disagreement about why exactly that was happening. Sponson had pointed out via Twitter that was the day that was also slated for finally swearing in Doug Jones. Might it be a dig at Doug Jones saying, I'm going to sign it the day you arrive, since there were so many people insisting that you should have been on hand to have the opportunity to vote on it, and we denied it to you. Did they deny it to him? Not entirely clear that procedurally they could have gotten him sworn in any earlier, absent the cooperation of Republican incumbent Senator Luther Strange and the Republican Secretary of State down there in Alabama. So if they simply defaulted and followed the law, it's not clear that they would have been able to get Doug Jones sworn in before the scheduled vote, though they also, of course, could have and did prevail upon Mitch McConnell to simply delay the vote, but he wasn't having it. And he went ahead and did it. Okay, let's see. Where are we here? Yes, one of the questions that was posed yesterday, why the delay? And will it create problems? Michael and a couple others asked, isn't it a problem waiting until till January 3rd? Because that's actually quite a long time. And there was some confusion about the operation of the 10 days limit that is mentioned in the Constitution. There was some question about whether or not delaying putting the signature on the bill for more than 10 days created problems with the effectiveness of the bill. It doesn't. There was also some question of, isn't January 3rd the second session of the current Congress, and does that create problems? It is the second session, or likely will be the convening of the second session, but it doesn't create any problems. Bills, passed or unpassed, do not die as between sessions of the same Congress. They are only affected if unpassed bills die at adjournment sine die. That is the final adjournment of the entirety of the Congress. Happens usually somewhere in December or January after the elections. So in December of 2018/early January 2019, they will officially adjourn this Congress sine die, and then all the bills unpassed at that point would die. But a bill that had passed but not been signed is still live, at least for the time being. The only thing that adjournment sine die means for bills that are passed but not yet signed is that the president has 10 working days, 10 days, excluding Sundays, according to the Constitution. We also read federal holidays into that. We still don't count Saturdays in that for whatever reason, maybe because the White House is a both a residence and a working office. And we expect, if the president needs to sign something on a Saturday, he needs to walk down the hall and do it. Or they could bring it to him in his bedroom, for that matter, and he'd sign it there. So it's not a big deal. But anyway, the Constitution says, ordinarily, in the ordinary course of things, the president has 10 days, excluding Sundays and also now holidays, to sign the bill. Now, if the Congress has not adjourned sine die, nothing in particular happens. A bill that is unsigned simply becomes law without the president's signature. It is only if the president refuses for whatever reason or forgets for whatever reason, this president could just forget, to sign the bill, and the Congress has adjourned sine die, that it's a problem. That becomes what we now call a pocket veto. Not an issue as between sessions of the same Congress, that is, from one year to the next inside of the same Congress without having elections. So that doesn't enter into it here. But the question of whether or not the bill would become law without his signature, he clearly doesn't want it to become law without his signature. He wants to have a signing ceremony and make a big deal out of it. Well, is January 3rd too late? Probably not. If the bill is shipped off to him and they begin counting, if they shipped it off to him yesterday and they begin counting today, the 21st would be day one. 22nd, Friday, would be day 2. 23rd, Saturday, would still be day 3. 24th, Sunday, doesn't count according to the Constitution. The 25th, Monday, a federal holiday, likely won't count under current, say, Supreme Court. I don't know whether it's actually Supreme Court precedent or not, but courts generally would recognize the federal holiday of Christmas not to count. That's the 25th. That's Monday. We're still on day 3 in the counting. The 26th, I don't think, is actually a federal holiday. Tuesday, day 4. The 27th, Wednesday, would be day 5. The 28th, Thursday, day 6. The 29th, Friday, day 7. The 30th, Saturday, day 8. Sunday, the 31st, it's a Sunday, doesn't count. Monday, New Year's Day, January 1st, probably federal holiday, doesn't count. Tuesday, January 2nd would be day 9. And guess what? Wednesday, January 3rd would be day 10. And he makes it under the deadline and he has his signing ceremony. He could do it on the 2nd, but he's going to do it on the 3rd for whatever reason. Now we get to the question of what was the reasoning. Now that we've cleared up for you in excruciating detail that it doesn't create any problems, doesn't blow up the bill as much as we might have hoped for it. Oh, look, I see a tweet that invokes enthusiasms and the baseball bat. I'll have to share that one with you. Just if you're listening live, you'll see it now. Otherwise, we'll put it in the roundup. So now that we have cleared up that it doesn't create any problems for the bill itself, we can get to the question of why are they doing it? And I think CBS has the more thorough answer on that one. Let's pull that up. No tax cuts for Christmas. Trump might delay bill signing. Remember, of course, Donald Trump swore that he would have this whole thing done for Christmas, by Christmas. And he's now saying he's not going to. Is it a broken promise? Yeah, sure. Who cares? Not me. Does he have a good reason for it? He actually does. This is actually pretty clever. And I'll give whoever realized it, it's not him. I'll give whoever realized it credit for picking up on this. This will help them disguise some of the most problematic and odious aspects of this bill. And although we'd like for the results of this bill, the natural results of this bill, to be visited upon Republicans as soon as possible, on the other hand, as Democrats, we have to recognize that people who are slated to get very badly hurt by this tax bill will have the hurt delayed for about a year, which may or may not give us an opportunity to actually do something about it. And that ultimately is still a good thing, even if it means Republicans might escape some punishment. Celebrations aside, the CBS News piece begins, President Trump may wait until next year to sign the tax bill into law, delaying $120 billion, here's the issue, in automatic cuts to popular programs such as Medicare and sparing Republicans from having to explain them in an election year. Here's why, or that is to say, here is the mechanics of how that happens. If Trump signs the tax bill this month, which he could, Oh, and I forgot to explain, by the way, you can game that 10 days a little bit by delaying, to some extent, simply delaying dispatching the bill to the White House. The officers of Congress, and in particular the Secretary of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, they have some ministerial roles in preparing the document to be sent off to the White House for signature. And you can drag your feet on that and simply slow down the engrossment, as they call it, of the bill, the preparation of the bill on parchment and double checking and proofreading, etc. And you can take your sweet time doing it if for whatever reason you need to slow things down so that the president can get there and sign it. I don't know that they're going to need to take advantage of that, but that just gives you an idea of how much room there is to game around the 10-day thing, which is why it doesn't really come up very often. If you can play with that many rules, it rarely becomes an issue. All right, so here's why he's delaying the signing. If Trump simply signs the bill as soon as it gets to the White House, if he did it this month, it would trigger, you know it would, we told you it would, it says so right in the bill, trigger steep automatic spending cuts early next year to a raft of programs. And we know which ones they are. They're the social safety net. And it's the idea of the bill. That was their design. This is the reason they wanted it. This is the reason the tax cuts are unpaid for. It's part of the reason why they were willing to run up the debt, even though they say they're debt and deficit hawks, because they knew that it would trigger these automatic cuts in programs that they can't otherwise get Republicans to have the nerve to go on record voting to cut. So when they sign the tax bill, it does trigger automatic spending cuts at some point. If he signed it this month, the automatic cuts begin early next year. But if Trump waits until January to sign the bill, the spending cuts then get delayed until 2019. I guess the language somewhere in all of this automatic cuts and sequestration business is in the calendar year following the signature of a bill that does XYZ to the debt and or deficit, the following calendar year shall see these automatic cuts. So if you sign it in 2018, 2019 is when you'll see those cuts. It's actually quite clever on their part. If Trump waits until January to sign the bill, the spending cuts would be delayed until 2019, that is, after next year's congressional elections, giving lawmakers a full year, not only to deny that they're happening, but to prevent them from happening in the first place so that they never have to explain it, even if they're looming at the end. But they can also, of course, simply do nothing and go through the election saying Democrats were lying. It's fake news that there was going to be automatic cuts. Look around. They haven't happened. And they may never happen. In fact, I promise you that they won't. Elect me and I'll change it. And of course, if they do that, then they literally can then come back and say, we're going to pass a legislative fix to prevent this from happening. I don't know that they really would be inclined to do that, but they can promise it during the election, and that's what counts. And then they can come back and say, golly, gee whiz, we couldn't agree, or we decided not to, or whatever, or to hell with you, who gives a crap, and the cuts go through anyway. Or, they kick the can down the road. They've done it with other things before. And this is the kernel of truth, if there is one, behind pronouncements by people like Mitch McConnell saying Democrats are misleading people about the consequences of this bill, and the media is just repeating their talking points. The media and the Democrats are reading the bill literally and the effects of the bill literally and saying, look, if you run up the debt and add to the deficit, add to the debt like this bill does with unpaid for tax cuts, etc., then the consequences of that is automatic sequestration style cuts in these entitlement programs and the social safety net programs. That's supposed to be the operation of law. Republicans are saying, yes, that's the operation of law, but we might pass a new one that says we're not doing that. Now, you also might not pass a new one that says you're not doing that, but you might. And so therefore it is just plain a lie when Democrats say, this is what's supposed to happen. This is what you decided should happen when we passed this law and the previously existing sequestration laws. This is what's on the books. We're simply reading them to you. Yeah, but we could change all that. We could change the rules. Okay. I mean, I guess that's literally true. We should acknowledge that. And we'll probably even maybe be a part of an effort to prevent it from happening, because why hurt people if you don't have to? Anyway, let's read on with this one. Congress gave final approval to the $1.5 trillion tax package Wednesday, sending it to Trump. Oh, also, by the way, might as well use this opportunity to say, good point being made by journalists and analysts along the way. I don't know if I can immediately identify who said it and where, although I do think I put it aside in a pocket somewhere. If I can find it, I'll give it to you in the roundup. But calling this a $1.5 trillion tax package is also a misnomer. That is, of course, the hole that it will leave in the debt long term at the end of the 10-year budget window. But there were lots of tax hikes and other revenue increases along the way inside this bill that'll hit the rest of you that help pay for what is a net $1.5 trillion tax package, but is in fact a much larger giveaway, probably somewhere north of $2.5 trillion. I wish I had the numbers ahead of me, in front of me, but offset partially by increases in revenues, mostly taken out of course, middle class and poor people's pockets, and elsewhere, and the elimination of deductions of various sorts. And people who got hurt, people who lost various deductions and tax advantages, lost them in this bill in order to offset a much bigger tax cut for the wealthy and for corporations than the media frequently is giving them credit for, giving Republicans the negative credit for. In other words, $2 to $3 trillion are being given away to the wealthy and corporations, about half of which is recovered by pulling it out of your pocket. Therefore, a net $1.5 trillion loss in this tax package actually, makes it look better than it is, and it already looks like the worst deal in the history of the Congress. Anyway, the CBS story continues here. The bill signing delay wouldn't affect taxpayers. The tax cuts will still go into effect in January, and workers will start to see the changes, if any, in the amount of taxes withheld from their paychecks in February. So in other words, I guess technically this will make it a retroactive tax cut. 3 days worth of retroactivity, but it's a retroactive tax cut nonetheless. Mark it down. There's a kernel of truth in that. The delay, however, is also another example of how politicians from both major parties, both sides do it, routinely flout a law that was meant to instill fiscal discipline on Washington. The arcane budget law is called pay-go, or pay-as-you-go. That's where the automatic budget cuts are coming from, not sequestration. Remember that. Thank you, David. Wake up. Years ago, Congress approved the law imposing steep automatic spending cuts whenever Congress passes legislation that adds on to the nation's growing debt. Sounded smart at the time, right? That was at the point at which we thought Republicans cared about the debt, and so moderate to conservative Democrats were falling all over themselves, rushing to join them in a fit of interest in looking bipartisan and serious. And then we found out they were lying, and now we're stuck holding the bag of saying, but the debt. Well, Arliss Money can free us from that. But the automatic spending cuts, which have been around since Ronald Reagan was president, around since Reagan was president, because Reagan was around a lot longer than before he was president. Don't forget that. He's even older than Emma. Anyway, those automatic spending cuts have never been enforced. So I guess a good kernel of truth there in terms of avoiding the actual implementation of the cuts. Congress usually does come to the rescue, but Congress has in the past, believe it or not, been saner than it is now. Republicans want to add a provision to a year-end spending bill that would waive the pay-go law, but they need help from Democrats to do it. So a crude tool designed to prod Congress to face up to its fiscal responsibilities now goes the way of the dinosaur. Bill Hoagland, a former Senate Republican aide, wrote up in an op-ed in Roll Call, despite Republican claims otherwise, the tax bill would add billions to the nation's debt, more than $1 trillion over the next decade, $1.5 trillion, in fact, according to official congressional estimates. If the pay-go law is waived, Trump can sign the tax bill as soon as it reaches his desk, without worrying about the automatic spending cuts. But if the law isn't waived and Trump signs the bill this month, he would be required to issue an order to cut about $120 billion in spending in early 2018, said Hoagland, who is now a senior vice president at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And it says bipartisan, so you know it's true. The pay-go law was meant to be painful. The cuts would target specific programs, including Medicare, price supports for farmers, a fund for crime victims, which you know Trump loves, and subsidies for affordable housing, Hoagland said, which he you'd think he hates it, but he loves it because he makes those payments to himself. The Section 8 housing, he owns plenty of those apartments, and so does Jared Kushner. Those federal payments for housing support end up in his pockets and his son-in-law's as well. If Trump waits until January to sign the tax bill, the automatic spending cuts would be delayed until 2019, giving lawmakers time to waive the pay-go law, said Ed Lorenzen, depending on how he pronounces it, a former Democratic aide who is now a senior advisor for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is all likewise responsible because it says so. That means Congress wouldn't have to do anything to prevent it from taking effect until the end of the year, he said. Trump's economic advisor, Gary Cohn, said the president would likely sign the bill as soon as possible. If we can get pay-go waived in the spending bill, we will sign the tax bill this year, Cohn said Wednesday at an event sponsored by Axios. They have to fit that in there. The president would like to sign the tax bill. So if in the next couple of days they get a CR together that waives pay-go, if they can manage to put that in there, well, that would reveal all the Republican hypocrisy you ever needed to see in a single week, for one thing. But it would also allow him to sign the bill possibly before Christmas or at least before the end of the year and still not run into that pay-go problem. Why CBS News felt the need to mention that the event at which Cohn said this was sponsored by Axios, I would love to know one day. It's not really of any serious import, but why bother? I can't figure that one out. Anyway, let's see. Other things I guess I should make mention of. I know I retweeted this a little bit earlier, and it kind of makes the point pretty compactly. But let's see, where is it? I was just basically going to say all the hypocrisy you need to see. Yes, Adam Johnson had a little tweet storm about this, and the first couple tweets of this make this point very well. He's got a "this article aged well" tweet, and he calls back to the New York Times piece from March of 2010 entitled "Tea Party," I love this, "Tea Party Avoids Divisive Social Issues." This tweet aged well, this article aged well, right? The commentary thereupon, from 2009 to 2012, centrist and liberal media routinely took Tea Party and Paul Ryan at their word that they were animated by, quote, fiscal responsibility. True, right? Yesterday, here's the note, all 30 members, remaining members, I guess, of the 2011 Tea Party caucus established in the House, and Paul Ryan, of course, who was not a member of that, voted for a bill that will add over $1 trillion to the deficit. A mea culpa is in order. He also, by the way, adds to that, the Tea Party was transparently, really, for most of us who were paying attention, John Birch Society 2.0. The founder, by the way, Fred C. Koch, the Tea Party founders, of course, his two sons. But the Tea Party was transparently John Birch 2.0, but credulous and careerist journalists kept treating it like it was a sober, fiscally driven movement of wonkish libertarians. And that may be a little bit of, that's more a description of how they treated Paul Ryan than the Tea Party necessarily. But there you have it. Basically, the Tea Party caucus that formed in 2011 in response to their calls for saying, oh, we're only it's not that we hate Obama. It's not that Obama's black. It's that we're for fiscal responsibility. They all flipped on this and voted to put a $1.5 trillion hole in the debt and never look back. Anyway, lots of other great information. I guess we'll save it for Friday show and perhaps some shows earlier next week. There's always great information I want to share with you. We'll get to that. And there's always great information and great stories that I can't get to that we can rely on Justice to bring you for his West Coast cookbook and speakeasy. And here are some of those that follow. There's, of course, the video of Mike Prince praising Herr Fuhrer, get it, so much that you'd think Dixie cups were being handed out in Guyana. Wow, some callback. Then they'll examine how an Alabama town revolted after the mayor, the judge, the prosecutor, and the town cops set up an asset forfeiture scam to rip off the town folk. What else? A California woman detained by ICE sues the agency because she's a citizen. Bad idea for them
Daily
to detain
Kos
her.
Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Here's some good news. The U.S. Department of Education canceled the student loan debt of 12,900 people defrauded by defunct diploma mill Corinthian colleges. Oh, you know, and I forgot to give you an update about Berea College, which I heard a lot about from our list bunny. Actually sounds like a fairly interesting place. Maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow.